Good afternoon, guys. This tutorial is going to give you an introduction to just a lot of the basic concepts that you're going to need to understand when you're developing a server for an app or a website that has an app in it, and for developing an app. This tutorial is going to probably cover some things that you haven't talked about before in class, so just keep that in mind. This is very application based, very pragmatic. I'm not trying to go theoretical. This is just what you need to know in order to get stuff done. So let's start with a short discussion about Java and why I'm using Java. So Java was designed, certainly the last several versions of Java have been designed in conjunction with a set of standards called Enterprise Java. And now that's a little bit of a loose term, but if you Google Enterprise Java, you'll start seeing things like EJB. What is EJB? Enterprise Java Bean. It's kind of funny, right? You'll see things like JPA. Or what is that? That's Java Persistence API. You might see things like Tomcat, Jetty, Hibernate, ORM. These are some of the terms that you're going to run into. So I'm going to take you through sort of a crash course on what's going on in there. I'm going to unpack a few of those. Let's start by talking about what are these trying to accomplish, and why do you care about them? JPA, Java Persistence API. That probably doesn't sound like anything very useful to you, but basically it's to help you store data inside of a database. And indeed, if you're building a larger application, you're going to want to store your data in a database. In fact, even if you're building something relatively simple and small, there are all kinds of reasons that it's better to use a database than to just, open files and write text into them. And you guys have probably all done one of those intro to computer science projects, right, where you open a text file and then you write something on the first line and you write something on the second line, and then you put a list of numbers on one of the lines separated by commas, and then you're supposed to read all that back into your program, right? That you can do that. It's fine. It's just that's a lot of work. I know I wouldn't want to have to do that much work, and so enter JPA. JPA is itself more analogous to an interface than a class. And here I'm using Java-specific terminology mostly, though the concept of interface does occur in other languages. So basically, the idea here is JPA defines a certain way that you're able to talk to a database. If you want to just write Java and use a database, you want to use a JPA implementation. When I say a JPA implementation, what do I mean? Well, you can use any number of different libraries in order to use JPA. A popular one is Hibernate. Another popular one is Eclipse Link. There's also OpenJPA. I forget what Glassfish uses. I'll get into what Glassfish is in a minute. But the point is that there are a bunch of different systems that all have a JPA implementation. And what that means is, say I define an interface. So I'm just going to open up an interface that I was working on. here we go. So this is a really simple interface. You guys have probably seen something like this before, right? It kind of looks like an abstract class, but you have function definitions. And then you have different classes that can implement that. So let's look at one of the classes that implements it. So in the list of things that it says implements dereferenceable. And then we go down here and we see the same method header along with some function body. And what that particular interface is doing is outside of the scope of what I'm talking about here, but that's an introduction to the idea about an interface. So you can have different Java classes that do the same thing because you can run the same functions on it. And that's what JPA is. JPA defines a way for you to work with a database. JPA allows you to store objects in your database, which you guys have had to write all the code where you go through your class line by line, and then okay, my class has a name field, string name, okay, object.getName, and then save that, and then has a size, object.getSize, and then save that. That's a pain, right? I mean, nobody wants to do that. So wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody had just given you a library where you could just give it any object, no matter what it was, and it would magically transform it into data inside of a database? And that's exactly what JPA does. So if you're interested in learning more about JPA, I would Google JPA. The current version is 2.1, and it does a lot of cool stuff. So that's JPA. The other technology I'm going to talk about here is something called jax-rs. And you're probably going, jax-rs, that sounds like nothing. Well, I can't recall what the first part of it is. I think it's like Java X, because it's like the package name or something. And then the last part of it is RS, is REST services. You guys have probably all heard of a REST API, right? Well, a REST API, for those of you who aren't initiated on this, is basically an API that allows you to communicate with it using the web. So a REST API will return some sort of computer readable code, and you can go to it like a website. So I'm going to pull up one now. I'm going to pull up let me see. Alright, so this is what that would look like with something called a JSON formatter. We can get into JSON in a little bit, but for now I'm just going to focus on the fact that it returns this information in this format that you can read it as a human being, but it is clearly designed to be read by a computer because it's formatted in a very strict way. There's rules for everything. Like you see, every attribute, like every part of your class has an ID, so that this would be a variable name, right? The variable name would be ID, and it's in quotes. All variable names are in quotes, you notice. And then if it's a number, there's no quotes around it. But if it's a string, there are quotes around it. So I'm actually going to pull up that class for you guys. Now, before we get into all the other stuff going on in here, you can see this is actually an instance of a Java class being represented in the web. You can see it has a long attribute, ID, which is that number there. It has a string attribute, which is name, which is that right there. It has a start hour, which is an integer, which is that right there, and a start minute, an end minute, and an end hour, and then a list. And this list is represented kind of like an array. And then each one of the things in the list is itself an object. So this is an example of what you use jax-rs for, because this is a REST API. And so what that means is you can perform different HTTP function or method calls to it. When you go to a website, your browser is actually doing an HTTP function call. You don't have to know how that works in order to use any of these, but just to keep that in mind, that's what's going on. Your browser does a get. So give me content. So get content, thank you very much, read content. And in this case, it's formatted in JSON instead of HTML. Usually your browser gets content in HTML, like if we were to go to google.com, this is all HTML. This is all JSON. So that's a little bit about jax-rs. Now, the reason you're like, okay, well that probably looks a little bit complicated, and like I have to like set up a website and all that. Well, no, actually, it's not that complicated. I mean, it still takes some work, but the wonderful thing about jax-rs is it actually does almost all of the work for you. So you don't have to know very much about how this works at the low level. It's always better if you do, but even if you're not an expert, you can still put together something like this very easily, and that's what I'm here to show you today. Let me see. I'm going to go over another technology, EJBs. What are EJBs? Basically, they are Java classes that perform operations specific to your program. You can actually use them in a ton of different ways. In our case, we're going to be using Java objects, EJBs, in order to access the database. But we're not constrained to that. You can use them for a lot of other things. For now, that's a good introduction to it. So, just a little bit about some of those technologies. And on to the fun part. You're kind of probably wondering at this point, you go, well, okay, I have this code, maybe I could write it using one of these technologies, but once I write the code, how do I get it onto a website? Well, a website is just a computer that's sitting somewhere. One computer you could use is one of Amazon's computers in Amazon Web Services. Another computer you could use would be one of the computers on a cloud platform called OpenShift. It's actually free. If you want to write some small projects, you can just upload your whole project and they'll run all your Java applications, and you can do whatever you want to your heart's content. So, as far as the nitty-gritty, how do you actually do this? Well, so it may surprise you to know you've probably written a ton of Java programs for your classes, including Hello World, where you start out public static void main string args, and then run my code, and write, 200 line long main function, right? Probably done that a few times. The wonderful thing about using all of this is you don't have to do that. There is no main function because you are basically treating every application that you build like its own library. So that means that you don't have to deal with building your own web server. Java, jax-rs actually has taken care of all of that for you. So all you have to do is write a Java class and name your functions so that the web browser knows which function to call. And so when you do an HTTP GET, when you navigate to a page, it calls your function, and then whatever your function returns, it prints it out all nicely like that. In fact, you don't even have to format that into JSON. You can return an object. You can create your own custom class. You don't have to do anything special with your class, and it will create all of the JSON for you just by returning that object. It's not necessary to worry about how any of this works, and that's why we do this. Now, you're probably asking at this point, okay, that sounds a little too good to be true. Is it really that easy? And, well, actually, it pretty much is. There are a few complications, and that's what I'm here to clear up today. So I think that's all for now. I'm just going to do that as an introduction to a lot of these technologies, and then I'm going to take a deep dive in the next video into what exactly is going on and how you can go about using them. Thanks for watching, guys.